But the tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. And there are those times in life when tension escalates to the point where weapons are drawn. And we don't have to look back too far in our history to see that. World War I began because of escalating tensions between Germany, Austria, Hungary on one side, Russia, France, Great Britain on the other. Eventually, tensions escalated to the point where weapons were drawn. And the plan became harming those people for who the tension was blamed. Because in their minds, they thought, hey, if we can get rid of the people, then the tensions will disappear too. And it was a brutal war. We still talk about it. It's a part of our history. And sometimes you may have heard it said about history that those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Well, apparently they didn't learn too much from that. Because roughly 2 decades later, tensions escalated again. For what historians said were for pretty much exactly the same reasons. And weapons were drawn. And we saw World War II. Maybe the musician Sting had it right when he wrote the song, when he penned the lyrics and then sang the tune, "History will teach us nothing." Maybe he had it right. Because when it comes to tension in our lives between us and other people, that's often the tune that we whistle. See, tensions escalate, don't they, between us and other people. And the closer those tensions get to home, then the higher and the more difficult they are. Often, those tensions are like they've always been. Because tensions from 4 generations ago become the same tensions from 3 generations ago, 2 generations ago, now into ours. The same tensions have a way of working their way down between nephews and cousins and aunts and uncles and spouses and parents with their kids and their kids themselves. See, has history really taught us anything about how to eliminate tension? Some of us might have walked into church this morning with some. There's tension in a relationship. Maybe it's even escalating, like it so often does. Well, now what are we going to do? Is history just going to repeat itself? Or is there another way? Well, today we're going to continue our series in Genesis. We're trying to get through the book of Genesis this year. And we're in Genesis chapter 37 this morning. And we'd love for you to follow along if you'd like. If that's a way that you can follow and track, that's great. I know some people just like to listen very carefully, but if you'd like to follow along, then you can grab a Bible in the chair in front of you, and let's stand together and turn to that page. And let's just read the first part of this chapter. We are going to do the full thing, but we'll start with just the first half. We'll just one bite at a time. Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. And this is the account of Jacob's family line. So here's the start of the story. And we're taking a shift today now into the story of Joseph. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born in him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" and they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. God, today we thank you for another opportunity to study your word, and this is one, again, that touches close to home. And so I pray that just as we gather today and we hear this story and learn how it applies to us, that we would be just sensitive to maybe where we're at with certain people in our life and to understand more fully what you're challenging us to and encouraging us towards today. And I pray that in your name. Amen. Please be seated. So guess what? This story begins with escalating tensions. This family's got tension. And the specifics of that are among the brothers. Joseph is having tension with all his other brothers. And because of that, there's some tension also between all those other brothers and their dad. Those are the specifics of this story. It's very internal to the family, very children-father related. And yet the things we're going to pull out of this passage are principles that we could probably apply to any relationship that's experiencing escalating tensions of their own. Do you have any of those? Do you have any of those tensions right now, maybe with family or in relationships that are so thick you could cut with a knife? See, weapons have been drawn. And while they might not be actually physical weapons like a knife, there's a lot of ways that we can pick a fight with various weapons. So how do we stop this? How do we eliminate tensions? Well, one of the best ways might be just to learn how they start. Fighting for number one will escalate tensions. Fighting to be number one is going to escalate tensions. Look at verse 2. This is how the story starts off. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Well, little brother's got a lot of nerve. Because there he is in the fields with his brothers. And in one sense, they're all in the same playing field, because in verse 2, they're all shepherds. They're all doing the same job. But on the other end of that, these brothers are all older than him. They have a lot more experience than Joseph, being the youngest. But there they are, all working together, and as so many sibling interactions happen, the youngest tattles. Now, we don't know if there is good reason for that. We're not sure from that verse if there is actually a cause for the report. Maybe there was. Or maybe Joseph is just spinning tales. Maybe he's just blowing things way out of proportion to make his brothers look bad. Now, in our home, we've obviously dealt with that. And in your home, I'm sure you've dealt with that. You know how that sounds, and if you don't have children yet, but one day will, you know how that sounds. You were a kid once. You know how that sounds. Mommy, Jimmy took a cookie. Mommy, Sarah took my hairbrush. She won't let me in the bathroom. Daddy, Bobby said a swear. Daddy, Abby said that she hates my guts and that she wished I was never born and she never wanted a little sister and she wishes I was a brother. See, you know what that sounds like. And in our home, my wife Danielle, whenever those things came about, she would always ask them, are you telling me this to hurt them or to help them? Are you telling me this to get them into trouble or to save them from more trouble. See, we're not sure why Joseph's doing this. We're not 100% sure what his reasonings are. But we do know his brothers didn't think it was very helpful. I mean, these brothers are already at the bottom of the ladder in their dad's eyes. And there's this kid brother rubbing their faces in it, fighting to be number one. Living as though he's above all his older brothers. Living as though he's over top of them and they're lower than him. See, fighting for number one, living like you're over top of somebody, that's going to escalate tensions. And so will this. Favoring a number one, that's going to escalate tensions. Look at verse 3 down to verse 4. Now Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Jacob had a favorite, and it was no secret. See, in his family, Joseph ruled their father's heart. He was their father's highlight. He was the trophy child. He was the one that always got put to the front of the line, getting first dibs and being introduced before anybody else. See, Jacob would walk into a situation and he'd be like, oh, let me introduce you to my family. Joseph, come here. This is Joseph, and Joseph is such a good boy, chip off the old block. This is Joseph. And, oh yeah, no, those are his brothers. Now, that might sound exaggerated. It might sound exaggerated, that example. But the only thing exaggerated in this was really Jacob's love for Joseph. Look at verse 3. Again, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. He got special treatment. And so there's Jacob making this incredibly ornate robe for Joseph. And that robe, sometimes in modern culture, is called the Technicolor Dream Coat or whatever we've said it is. It really is this robe that's this billboard. It's like a billboard flashing with bright lights saying this is the important one. This is the one right here. This is the favorite right here. That's what that robe said. And to make those lights burn a little bit more, that robe didn't just communicate that Joseph ruled their father's heart. That robe actually communicated that robe meant that Jacob also ruled their brother's hands. He was in charge. Look at verse 14. I'm going to get there in a minute, but let's look at verse 14. This is Jacob talking to Joseph. He says, so he said to him, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. Okay, now that seems maybe, okay, what's the big deal about that? Well, this is a big deal. There's been a major shift in the house. Because in verse 2, Joseph's a shepherd with everybody else. By the time he gets that robe and is in verse 14, he's ruling over his brothers. He's no longer in the fields. He's going to check on them. He's going to do his dad's business. He doesn't have to stay there. He is ruling over his brothers. His dad has put him in charge over top of them. And that's not lost on the brothers. That's part of what's reflected in their question in verse 8. When he said, his brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? They know what's going on. Favoring a number one. Living as though there's some sort of a pecking order. That's going to escalate tensions. Fighting to be that number one. Favoring someone as a number one. That's all going to escalate tensions. And so will this. A plan fulfilled by number one will escalate tensions. Look at verse 5 down to verse 9. Joseph, so this is about his dreams. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more. You know, it seems every single verse, their brothers are hating this guy more because of his dream and what he said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. He just couldn't keep it to himself. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." A plan fulfilled by number one, God himself, is going to escalate tensions. Because God in the Old Testament often spoke in dreams. He often revealed what was going to happen. He revealed his plan in dreams. And that's a big part of Joseph's story. It starts here. As we continue to look at Joseph, we're going to see more dreams being said and kind of how they all play out in the plan. So God sometimes spoke in dreams. He wasn't the first one to have a dream. His father Jacob had a dream that God revealed things to him in Genesis 28. His father's father-in-law Laban, in Genesis 32, he had a dream. Beyond this time, you see more dreams. For example, King Solomon in 1 Kings 3 has a dream. Daniel in Daniel 7 has a dream. And these dreams aren't the dreams we have because we've had too much coffee and stayed up too late. These are God's plans being revealed to people through a dream. And if they get the same dream twice, which is what Joseph is really having here, the same meaning twice, then all that means is, yeah, God's going to do this. That's a confirmation of what God's going to do. And we see that in Genesis 41:32 when Joseph is interpreting a dream that Pharaoh had. And that verse said, the reason the dream came to Pharaoh in two forms is because the matter has been firmly decided upon by God, and God's going to do it soon. So here's Joseph having two dreams saying the same thing, which is just confirming the fact that God has a plan and that's what's going to happen. Do you think God's plans could escalate tension? You think God's plans could escalate tensions? Think about this for a second. Have you ever watched someone's life and you just see God using them in maybe a unique, special way, or God is doing something in their life that you think is amazing, and you wonder why that's not you? Does that escalate tensions? You see God's plan being lived out in other people's lives, and it's cool and it's amazing, and it's something you may even want, and so you struggle with that because why is that not me? See, God's plan fulfilled can escalate tensions. Do you ever get those kind of tensions? Because I know I do. I do. I mean, and you might too. You look at what you're doing. You look at what you're doing in life, maybe your job or other things, and you're saying to yourself, well, I'm pretty sure I'm doing things exactly the same as that guy. I mean, I'm doing the same things. I'm involved in the same things. For example, like maybe even in this church, well, I'm doing the same things, and we're doing all the same things as the guy down the street. So then why aren't we exploding with growth like them? And why isn't God adding to us like they are them? And then you get people sometimes that walk into your life and they ask the very same thing about you. Look at what God's doing in your life. Why is he not doing that in mine? A plan fulfilled by number one, God himself. Because we sometimes struggle with that. Maybe we don't like it or just wish it was us. That's going to escalate tensions. All these things, someone fighting to be number one and live above everybody else, a father favoring a number one and kind of affirming that to be true, And God, number one, fulfilling his plan first and foremost, which kind of seems to communicate all that's true, is what these brothers are dealing with. And all these things are bearing down on their brothers, Joseph's brothers. And there's tension. And that tension is escalating. Seemed like every other verse, and they hated him more, and they hated him more, and they hated him more. That tension is so thick right now, you could cut it with a knife. And so weapons were drawn. No, they weren't literal weapons. Their weapons were a hard heart and ready hands to eliminate who they felt was the cause of all this. That's the second part of this chapter. Let me just read it to you so we hear the story from verse 12 down to the end. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing their flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." Okay, again, he's reigning over them now. He has a new job. "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance. And before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. Oh, they hated that robe. The ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he's our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy's not there. Where can I turn now?" Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe into the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." He recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Let's just cut this punk kid down. Let's just cut off God's plan. I mean, if we eliminate him, that plan's not going to be fulfilled. Let's just cut down our old man who likes this guy so much, who favored him as number one. Let's just do that by cutting off this young punk teenager. Let's throw him in a hole. See, at first they thought they could eliminate all this tension by throwing their brother in a hole. Let's just cut him off. That was the idea. Let's just cut him off. Now, how often in our relationships when there's tension, that's our go-to? Let's just cut him off. Let's just cut this person off. And in a sense, we throw them in a hole and then we walk away. It's interesting how we think that's going to fix things. We think some sort of a physical separation is going to help with everything else. In a recent article, a psychologist by the name of Teresa Greenberg was writing about this, the whole dynamic about being cut off by family. And she said that after 25 years of a practice, in the last few years, she's seeing a resurgence, these people that are coming into her office day after day after day with these deep emotional scars because of a family or relationship being cut off. 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. See, we've thought that if we can separate them physically, then the emotional stuff will go away, that the tensions are going to go away, that everything that came with that. They thought that would happen. Now, Reuben, it's interesting how Reuben says, let's not do that. Let's not do that. See, Reuben wasn't on board, and I think why Reuben wasn't on board was because, remember Reuben? A couple weeks ago? Okay, that's the guy that slept with his dad's other wife. So, I think he's trying to get some bonus points here. If I can be the savior here, then maybe my dad won't treat me like he is right now. He's probably trying to get bonus points. So he's not really for that cut off, let's kill him thing. He just wants to save him and get bonus points. So they tried that, and then after that, they tried, okay, let's not just cut him off. Let's see if we can make this situation work in our favor. Maybe we can get some sort of a personal gain out of this. Maybe we can get some sort of monetary kickback. Maybe we can find a payoff. And that's what they do. They sell him. They twist the situation in such a way that they get some sort of a personal gain from it. Now, how often do we do that? If we know we can't cut somebody off, we just try to find a payoff. We try to find a way to twist the situation in such a way that we're going to get something out of it. That maybe we'll get something, a bit of personal gain out of this. They tried to cut off, they tried to pay off. At the end of the day, all that's really happening here is history is repeating itself. This is eerily familiar to what happened in their father's life, Jacob. History is repeating itself. See, Father Jacob and his brother Esau were twins, but they couldn't have been any more different. In fact, the only thing that those two brothers shared was tension between them. There was tension between brothers. Now in his own family, with his own kids, there's tension between brothers. Father Jacob fought to be number one. He wanted to get to that place where he was going to be the one with the best blessing. And now all that's happening is Joseph is fighting to be number one, exactly like his dad did. Their father Jacob was not the favored son. So he would have known what that was like. He would have known what it was like to have a dad to ignore him and pay attention to his brother. He would have known all the issues that came with that. And yet here he is in his family allowing exactly the same thing to happen. In Father Jacob's life, there was a plan that God had, a very clear plan, and that plan made the family struggle to figure out their place in it. And here we are with Jacob's kids. There's a plan of God, and they're all struggling with what their place in that plan is. History is just repeating itself. There's even how the deception came to be. When Father Jacob deceived his own dad, Isaac, to get that blessing. How did he do it? With a goat. He dressed himself in goat hair because his brother apparently was some hairy beast of a man. And so they had to get this hair all over him with a goat. And then in his own life, his sons deceive him with a goat. It's not hair this time, it's the blood, but it's a goat. And in Father Jacob's life, when he ran away from his brother and his family, when he was cut off from them, it was for 20 years. And his sons don't know this yet. He does not know this yet. But it's going to be 20 years before they are reunited. All that's happening is history is repeating itself. And the question is, did they learn nothing from their history? Did they learn nothing from the tensions that they had of their own? Did they learn anything from this? And the question for us is, have we? Have we? Or our own tensions is kind of weaving down the line. A number of years ago, I was asked to do a funeral just up here in Stroud. I know the director of the funeral home, and I'm close, and so it seems to happen that whenever someone comes in and asks for a Baptist pastor, but doesn't actually have a Baptist pastor, they call me. And so that was one of those scenarios when someone wanted a Baptist minister to do their funeral, but didn't know any, so then I get the call. And of course, when funeral is a very difficult time in the life of family, and all you're really concerned about is caring for the family and hearing about the one that's passed away and preparing a nice funeral that you have some closure with. And that was all done. I met with a grandson and a daughter of this lady. We got the plan all ready to go. And then it was the day of the funeral, and I actually brought my son Kai. He was about 9 years old at the time. He was going to be my assistant that day. And so we went in there. We had I had my suit on, and Kai was ready with me, just to be there with me. We didn't know anybody here. And the funeral director came up to me, and he said this, Darren. Yeah, what's up? Do you know how to take care of yourself? And at first I thought, is my fly down or something? Like, what's going on? He said, no. Like, do you know how to take care of yourself? And I was thinking, like, what? Like, is something wrong? He said, no. Like, do you know how to physically take care of yourself? If the fight broke out. And I was like, yeah. Like, I did karate for a lot of years, second-degree black belt. I could probably take care of myself. And he's like, oh, whew, good. Because I got to tell you, this family is about to go to war. And I've never had to deal with this before, but I seriously think in the funeral there's going to be a fight that is going to break out. And so we need to know that, like, we can kind of control the situation. There was significant, thank goodness there was no fight. Maybe after when I left, I don't know. But the story seemed to be exactly the same one that we hear quite often. There's tension in the family generations ago. And that becomes tensions in the next generation. And then those tensions are held onto by the kids. And it never gets eliminated, never resolved. See, these kinds of tensions, what they are and how they occur, have a way of climbing our family trees. The pattern just continues to be weaved until we're stuck in the middle of it. And then it's our kids' turn to do it. And the plan to cut people off does not work. Because there's more to the situation than just physical things. And the plan for a payoff is horrific. Because what happens in this story with Joseph and his dad is so sad that as much as the kids try to kind of help the home and change the air in the room, they can't do it. They cannot do it. They paid for this. Their dad was not the same dad after that. Their interactions had all changed for the worst. And we know that Because later on in the story, 2 decades later, when Joseph is in charge of Egypt and there's a famine and his family needs food, and his brothers come knowing about this guy who has food, they don't recognize Joseph. And we'll look at that story later. They don't recognize Joseph. But Joseph knows who they are. And they say to him, Joseph says to his brothers, the next time you come for food, you better bring your little brother. See, because Joseph had a little brother, Benjamin, who was too young to be involved in this part of the story that we talked about today. And Joseph said, when you come back, you better bring your brother Benjamin, or you'll get nothing. And you know what Judah said? The one who thought, let's just sell him and make some money. At that moment, he said, we can't do that. We cannot bring Benjamin to you. I mean, our father already lost one son, and now he has Benjamin. He actually says, if you take Benjamin, our father will die. And in that one statement, there's 20 years of consequences and baggage that all the family had to face because they couldn't eliminate these tensions. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Okay, this is going to be real quick. How do we actually eliminate tensions? Okay, real quick. The first thing is this. To eliminate tensions, serve humbly. Instead of fighting to be number one, serve those people in your life. Do the things, even the little things, that are going to make life better for them. Galatians 5:13 tells us, you, brothers and sisters, are free. So don't use your freedom to indulge the flesh, but use it to serve one another humbly in love. Maybe that's what you got to do. You have to just continue to be humble and serve those people in your life. The second thing is this. To eliminate tensions, love equally. Instead of having favorites, especially in a family, you better make sure that each and every one of your kids and grandkids and everybody else knows how important they are. And that while they're all different and they all have different personalities, and while you're going to have different challenges with them because of that, you make sure every single one of those kids know that they are just as endeared as all the others. James 2:9 says, if you show favoritism, you sin, and you are convicted under God's law as a lawbreaker. Can't do it. Can't do it. And the final thing is this. To eliminate tension, submit completely. Instead of struggling with God's plan and how he sees things happening, understand that as much as you think you know how things got to go, God has already seen not just a few moves ahead, but he's seen the plan through right to its completion. And so you just better do things his way. You better continue to live in these various relationships and dynamics in a way that God says, this is how you got to do this. This is how you got to do this. And the promise for us in Romans 8 is all of God's plans are going to work for our good if we love him. When the tension is so thick, you can cut it with a knife, and you reach to grab for those weapons. What we got to do is drop them, and instead fill our hands with service humbly, with loving everybody equally, and with submitting to God's plan completely. That will not only help, maybe even completely eliminate those tensions, but it will also guarantee history doesn't repeat itself. Maybe today, the greatest tension you have in your life is with the most significant relationship you need, with God himself. We have a lot of tensions with that big guy sometimes. We have a lot of tensions. We don't like how he does things. We don't understand him. But this morning you need to know that God has already done everything that he needs to do to eliminate those tensions in your life. We know that Jesus Christ, God himself, came to serve us humbly. He's the king. I mean, he's God himself, and yet he came down to earth to serve us humbly. It says in Philippians 2 that God did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage, but he made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. And as a servant, Christ came to die for all our sins, all those things that caused tensions between us and him on the cross. And he did that because he loves equally. He doesn't pick favorites. It isn't like God came just to die for those that are going to try to be good and who live good lifestyles. God came for everybody equally. He came for the murderers, the rapists, those who cheat on their taxes, those who tell white lies to their wives and their kids. Everybody, he loved them equally. He said, this is for you. And we have a guarantee in that this morning because Christ submitted completely to what that plan was. He didn't quit on us. He knew the plan, as tough as it was. So he didn't pick up weapons to protect himself. In his hands, he filled them with those three things that we must: to serve humbly, love equally, and to submit completely. He's done everything he had to do to ensure us that through faith in him, you're just saying, God, I know that there's this tension, man. Can we let this go? And recognize your sin and give it to God. And he says that tension's eliminated and history doesn't repeat itself. Our history changes because we know that God's promises, we're going to be with him for all eternity. This great God who loved us so much with his hands. Let's pray. God, today we thank you for what I pray is not just a challenging message, because I know it's one that it's a story that we can all relate to. It's one that we've probably all lived and understand in some sense of that dynamic, and we might even be having things in our life now that echo these various things and themes. As much as I pray that it's been a challenge to hear some of these things, I also pray that we'd be encouraged to know that it doesn't have to stay this way. I mean, history can teach us something. We don't have to continue with this tension that's just going to spiral down our family tree into the root and decay so much more that's going to come. And so, God, I pray today that if that's the case for anybody here, any of our brothers and sisters, any of your children, that they would just recognize, okay, we can do this. I pray that they've been encouraged to just do some of the things, maybe as hard as they are, to do what they can do, their part, in trying to de-escalate some of this tension and eliminate it. I pray that they would learn to just serve those people in humility, to not lord it over them and think they're more important, but they would just continue to do the things in their life just to offer service to them. That'll eliminate some tension. And I pray that they would just love everybody equally, especially moms and dads with their kids and within a family, that they would understand the damage that does. And they would just learn to just treat everyone, though differently and uniquely, with the same heart of endearment. That'll de-escalate tensions. And God, again, I pray that we would just submit to your plan. It can be tough when we're in the middle of it and we don't understand it. When we struggle to see things happen in others we want for ourselves. I know that's all a struggle. And God, we're thankful that you've seen things through to the end. You can see that very finish line that we can't. So I pray that we would just trust you in that. And as hard as it can be, that we would just drop our weapons and instead in our hands, pick up these things that we can help bring peace to some of this chaos and help reflect certainly what you've done in our life through offering yourself on the cross for us. God, I just pray that we would be encouraged this morning to do that. And that we would hear testimony of just what you have done because of us obeying and acting in the way that you've certainly seen as the truth. And I pray these things in your name. Amen.